Welcome everyone to our weekly lesson overview. This week we are in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, 9 through 20. These are our last two lessons in our Ecclesia study, and they will both be in the book of Revelation. We're going to be taking a look at chapter 1 this week, and we're going to be wrapping up our study next week in chapter 21. And so we're going to have these bookend chapters of the book of Revelation to help us end out this study and take a look at what God has for the church moving into the future. And so specifically our lesson for this week, John begins his letter to these seven churches with a vision of the resurrected, victorious Christ in his glory. Now, of course, the context, many of us are familiar with this, but while in exile on the island of Patmos, the Apostle John records a vision as instructed by Christ to send to the seven churches. And this is what plays out in the book of Revelation, is this vision that is given to John by Christ. Now, think about Patmos. Today, it is a resort destination there in the Grecian Isles. Back in John's time, it was a prison labor island where people like John who were in violation of the law were sent to be in exile and to work in prison labor. So if you go there today and try to get a sense of what it was like for John, it's going to be kind of hard because it's very luxurious and there's all kind of lots of places to stay and to see. It's a very beautiful island. I'm sure it was beautiful back in John's day, but the accommodations were a little less ideal back then. So just to give you a bit of that context. So let's take a look at our biblical truth for this lesson. Jesus possesses absolute authority in the world and commands the future of the church. This is a real important thing for us to grasp as believers and in our classes, is that the future of the church is not up to us. It's not dictated by world events. It is in fact dictated by Christ, who has all authority. Now, our learning goals for this lesson, we want to examine Jesus' sovereign authority over the present and the future, and we want to help our class to evaluate their worries about the future against the majesty and power of Christ. Now, this is a very timely lesson today, anytime it is, but of course we're just coming out of this very intense and frustrating debate on the debt crisis. And so many people were worried about what was going to happen to our nation, what would that mean as far as financially for our church, and we've got to be able to put those worries in a proper perspective. And this is a good lesson to help us focus that. And so let's go ahead and get to some of the things that John is talking about here in these few verses in chapter 1. First we see is the suffering and believers' response. Here we see John on the island of Patmos, and in these first few verses we see how he responds despite his suffering. And one of the first ways that a believer can respond is opposite of what John did, and that is through spiritual deadlock. This is where suffering results in faithlessness. You know, many people come to a time in their life where they endure suffering for a variety of reasons and a variety of ways, and that leads to faithlessness. They take their eyes off Jesus. They figure that he is not big enough to get them through. He is definitely not enough for them to sustain them through this. And you see this spiritual deadlock where the weightiness of the suffering that they're enduring is pushing against what faith, and perhaps the faith will come back once the crisis is over with, but in the time of suffering, their faith begins to fall away. But that's not the case with John. John gives us a good example of what we should do as believers when we are suffering. His response is to worship. We find him worshiping on the Lord's Day while in this, basically this penal island doing labor work. He is worshiping. He's worshiping there. And this is where suffering results in praise and thanksgiving to God. So John's got the right attitude when it comes to his suffering, and his response was that of worship. Now, as John is writing this, beginning of this letter, he gives us this amazing image of the resurrected and victorious Jesus. And this is an important thing because how we view Jesus matters greatly. And this matters greatly in how we address things like worry and anxiety in our own life. And so what I want to do now is, it's kind of different, maybe a little bit weird, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about how our society today views Jesus and how this actually affects us as believers in the church. Now, some of this may seem a little bit silly, some of it may seem outright offensive to you, but I want to kind of go through some of the things that are out there in our society that are having a very real impact on how we as believers view Jesus. And so let's take a look at some of these images that I've come across here that are all over the internet, all over the TV and things like that. First, we've got, of course, our traditional Western Jesus, long hair, blue eyes, I'm sure very soft, velvety skin. This guy here is not the King of Kings. This is more of a man that spends all of his time organizing fundraisers for PETA. He is not the type of majestic, victorious Christ that John is trying to paint here. But it's very common that we see things in our churches and our Christian imagery and things like that. Very calm, very passive type Jesus. We've got Buddy Jesus. This is a kind of a new thing that's come up. You can buy a Buddy Jesus, put him on your desk, put him on your dashboard. There's t-shirts with Buddy Jesus. He's a cool guy, loves everybody, doesn't really have any problems with sin. He just wants to be your buddy. We've got even in cartoons, on the popular cartoon Futurama, here's Zoidberg Jesus. Likewise on South Park, here's South Park Jesus. South Park Jesus comes along, he uses bad language, he has weapons, he kills people. That's their view of Jesus here. We've got Raptor Jesus. Believe it or not, there is this bizarre movement on the internet where they've kind of got this quasi-religion, and their God's kind of a mock religion is Raptor Jesus. We've also got Zombie Jesus. And actually, I think I find this more offensive than Zombie Jesus. This is American Jesus. This is a Jesus who's a tried and true conservative Southern guy. He's got his American flag draped over him. He, of course, loves America because we're the chosen people. And I can't stand this Jesus because it's just not true. And then last but not least, we've got Cyborg Pirate Ninja Jesus, who, of course, shows no mercy to his enemies. These may seem silly to you, but it's very real because these are the things that are bombarding believers, even in your classes. And this has an effect on how we view and understand Jesus. Let's kind of get back to the vision that John had and look at this here. The key word in this vision is like. John is not trying to paint a picture of Jesus for his readers, unlike the images we just saw. Instead, he is beholding the glory of his risen Lord and fumbling for words to describe it. You see in the lesson, your lesson actually has a really good list of this. Things like a son of man, hair like wool, eyes like fire, feet like bronze, voice like the sound of rushing waters. He sees this. He says, it's not these things, but it's like it. It's the best he can do to describe that. And he's painting a picture of Jesus. What he's seeing there is something, Jesus in all his glory, all his majesty. This is a powerful Jesus who stands in authority over all of creation, and he is especially in authority over the future of the church. So let's go back to our original slide, talk about how we view Jesus and how that matters. Our problem in properly understanding Jesus is not one of image, but is of understanding his character and his nature. It's not important how we view physically Jesus may have looked or how he looks now. We've got to get to the essence of who Jesus is. Does our understanding of Jesus cause us to confidently stand firm in our faith? And that's the real issue when it comes to worry. Anytime we see the issue of worry and anxiety addressed either in the teachings of Jesus or beginning here as John is writing this letter of encouragement to these churches under persecution, when we have worry, when we have anxiety, we are seeing an actual lack of faith and a view of God or view of Jesus that is too small and that does not measure up to the reality of Christ as presented to us in Scriptures. So as we help our classes understand the fact that the future of the church is firmly in God's hands, Jesus is has all authority over that, the fact that we've got to understand and have this proper understanding of Jesus. If we can help them to understand that, then we're going to help them with these issues of worry and anxiety that they may have about the future and how that may play out in the church. So as always, as you prepare, I am praying for you. I know Revelation's going to kick off a lot of questions, but I want to encourage you to keep it on topic. Don't get off into tangents about end times and pre-trib, post-trib, things like that. Stick with your topic. I'll be praying that God will speak through you this week. And as always, I'm looking forward to seeing you, God willing, this Sunday. Thank you so very much.